Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming to this webinar here. We're going to be talking about Agile and Kanban style workflows in Workamajig. We've done a session like this last month, so this is going to have a lot of similarities to that. I do want to talk a bit more about to-dos today than I did on the last session. So if you did attend the last one here, there should be a few new things here we're chatting through today. And if you haven't been to one of our webinars just yet, welcome. Again, thanks for joining. We do really kind of talk about top-level pieces in these sorts of sessions here. So we're going to go, I think, a little bit deeper than what we would typically do on a webinar here. But of course, you're always more than welcome to reach out for more detail or reach out to your account manager if you want a detailed training about how anything today here applies to your workflow. Now, I'm the only one that has the voice on this particular meeting here. So if you guys do have questions, feel free to use the chat. I'm going to be monitoring that here as the meeting goes along. I'm not sure if you can see it here on my screen. Hopefully not, I guess. But either way, if you do have questions or you want some more detail, feel free to pop them into the chat. I'll try to kind of pause at certain points through the session to address any questions that you have and add some more detail. And I'll also try to leave a few minutes at the end of the session as well for kind of any outstanding questions that you have. Now, like I said, this is a webinar covering Agile and Kanban style workflows in Workamajig. And our traditional training really does typically cover a more waterfall style workflow. I'm going to be working out of 3 tabs here too before I get started, so try to keep from giving you whiplash or kind of driving you too crazy. There's kind of a benefit to being able to see what your creatives see here and kind of how all of this information comes down to the users that you're assigning to tasks and projects. And then a more administrative level view for you as a resource or project manager or account manager, how you can see your users' tasks and how you can resource them. Now, like I said, traditionally, Workamajig is really set up to work with a waterfall style workflow. That's often how an account manager will teach you how to use the system. You know, if you've it's been a while since you've gone through the training. Oh, let me jump to my 3rd tab over here. One of the first things that we'll have you do when we're setting up the project management side of the system is to start to build templates out. And oftentimes, the way that we teach you to build those templates is in a waterfall style, where we ask you to define the major milestone tasks that are needed to complete a project, as well as the order and the length of time that it typically takes those things to go. So I'm going to use my event template here just as an example. Really kind of setting a background for Workamajig to be able to build you a projected planned start and complete date for any of the tasks that are on your projects. So basically saying, hey, these are the typical task lines that would go into an event style project. This is the order that these tasks can occur in, and then the number of days that those tasks take. And what that does in a traditional project sense is it allows us to kind of project, you know, based off of a start date, the timeline for your project as a whole, as well as each task within that project. So that's more of a critical path or waterfall style project management. Nothing wrong with that. Obviously, it's kind of a tried and true method. It's oftentimes how our account managers will train you how to set these templates up. But we do also have workflows that can cover Agile style workflows. So not quite so rigidly defined dates or order for tasks, more top level details on the sort of activities that are taking place inside of a project. And not so static dates in terms of how long these would take. So design concept or design are not so rigidly defined within the project context. It would look more kind of like something with a few less. So I have a couple of different template examples here for Agile. I have one for social media and one for more of a digital or web-based design style project. My social media is really kind of relating more to a month-to-month based project. So you'll notice it's not quite so rigidly defined. We do have a predecessor for a research and reports task, basically saying once all of the stuff is done here at the end of this period, whether it's a month or whether it's a week or a quarter, however you want to define that, you know, what is, you know, what are the tasks that are you know, let's go and pull these research and reports. So the major difference between your Agile templates and your waterfall style templates is often going to be your predecessors. Not necessarily that you won't use them, but we're not so concerned about the order of tasks the order of tasks that are happening here, more of what's happening within that time period and the ability to kind of move these within inside and outside of statuses as this project is ongoing. And then the same thing on the template side here, or my design-based template here. This one's kind of more of a design or web-based template. So, kind of ongoing pieces for some things that, may not necessarily have static dates, like bug fixes is a really great example. As those reports come in, we can basically kind of reopen this task or kind of slide it out for user to say, hey, we have something new here. And additionally, we can use a tool inside of Workamajig called To-Dos to add some detail to that. So a lot less kind of granular one after another task-based detail, a lot more kind of top level, hey, this is the planning side of the project. This is the implementation side of the project. For the constraints and the predecessors for these types of tasks in your projects, you don't necessarily have to use something like a duration of project. For something like this, though, you may. If this is an ongoing agreement with the client where you say it's a 3-month contract or something like that, you could just define your project dates when I copy this template into a live job. And then the constraint can basically say, okay, this task should be active within that time period. And actually, Katie, I see a question from you here regarding the constraints and why, or what constraints to use on these sorts of templates. That's really kind of up to you and your workflow. Consistently, something like this is helpful. I've actually had some discussion of having duration of month be an option or something like that in here. For my social template, I actually do just use as soon as possible, I think, for my constraints. I was trying to talk to a few of my clients that use this sort of this sort of methodology here and kind of around their constraints. And I found for the social, they do tend to still just leave these to as soon as possible. But you can do a duration of project for these or manually set your project date. So I see a combination of the two, and it's kind of a 50-50 split between, hey, I'm setting a 25 to 30-day duration because I want this to be a month-to-month piece, or I set it to duration of project, for example, to define, those project dates here at the template level. But either way, it kind of bears some testing to figure out what works best for you or what would make the most sense in your traditional workflow. But those constraints will control kind of how that works. So obviously they're a big part of that picture. And the reason I have this one set to as soon as possible is because I have the month roll up. So this is kind of designed to be able to be copied into the same project 5 or 6 times. Let's say if I had a 6-month contract to run social media for a specific client here, I could just grab out this block of tasks here into my existing project, or I could kind of create a new project for each month. So those are some of the questions that you'd ask, and that would really dictate how you'd want to set the constraints for those tasks when you're setting the template up. You got it. So obviously the template setup is a big part of it. And there's, again, this may be a discussion you have with your account manager. There may be some testing that you need to do with it when you're kind of running through that process. But either way, the base idea of what we're doing is kind of setting more of a top level detail for a project and the tasks and the activities that go along in it without setting that really specific set order of tasks. And, that traditional workflow in Workamajig would really kind of traditionally dictate that users would use a combination of the staff schedule and the Creatives Today page, specifically the card or grid views. If that's Greek to you, this is the card view. It's kind of the default view for tasks in Workamajig. I apparently have nothing open on my card view. Oh, that's why I got open to do items only. That will probably clear things up. And basically, the card view is that standard view. Looks kind of like this. Oh, neither of my 2 views have things coming up. That's fabulous. But basically, a version of these cards here that are formatted within groupings. And that's kind of the traditional page. It's actually the default for every user in Workamajig the first time that they log into the system. So it'll probably be familiar to many of you, but that really is kind of the default. Is meant to work with those traditional styles. The Kanban or Agile style workflow is meant to work with a combination of the assignment management page and that Creatives tile view. That's actually what we see right here, right now. So instead of just having tasks grouped within their due date ranges, so where we would typically see a block of tasks that are due on August 6th and then August 8th and so on and so forth, here we get tasks per classification in columns that we can move, kind of that Kanban style. And there's a lot of information on these cards. It's very similar to the card-based view, but essentially a creative or a project manager can take these tasks and move them from between the statuses here. And before we go too far into the operation for both of these pages, because they obviously have a relationship with each other, this is more of the admin style page. This is more of a user-based page and how they would operate Workamajig. There's a few notes just to take on these in general. By default, this page is actually disabled. And the reason for that is we're basically asking you to make a decision on the workflow between these two. It is entirely possible to work some projects as a critical path or waterfall style, kind of that traditional style of project management in Workamajig, and some in a more agile sense. Oftentimes you'd use security groups to separate those out, and I'll speak more to that in a bit here. But it can be confusing for your users, especially when you're first getting up and running, to have all of these options here. So we're basically asking you to make a decision between the two pages. And by default, the assignment management page is actually not active for most users. Admins are really the only ones that can see it by default. So before we get too far into today's training, I do want to mention this if it's something that you're interested in starting to play with or starting to roll out as something you'd like to implement for your instance. Even if you're in a project management or kind of a higher level security group, those pages won't be on for you by default. So the assignment management page in particular, this is that kind of administrative level page for a project or an account manager. That page is actually locked behind a security setting of, let me remember what the name is here. It is traffic assignment management screen, this right. And this again is disabled for most users by default, just so we kind of avoid that confusion. So if you're interested in this workflow, if you're an admin, you of course can just kind of turn this on. You'll probably see it anyways. If not, then you'll need to contact an admin in your instance to say, okay, you know what, for the traffic project management security group, let's go ahead and kick on that assignment management view here so we can start seeing and working with it. Another one of the reasons that we have it turned off by default is these statuses as well. Your users will actually not see these statuses on the traditional card view. Excuse me, I have a few extras on here. So the statuses that you see in here are specific to this tool and this workflow style, this Agile or Kanban style workflow. So again, it's kind of a commitment to this. You don't necessarily have to go all or nothing with it. Again, you can have certain teams or certain members of your agency use this tool and use the tile view, and certain others use the card view, and that's fine. But you'll want to be kind of mindful of the impact of that and how this will work. So from a setup perspective, of course, the first thing that we'll want to do is actually kick this screen on in general so you have access to it. Then from there on the Today Creatives page, this view as well is also turned off by default. This is called the tile view. It's pretty easy to turn this on. Again, if you have the rights to the system settings for the Today Creatives page, you can simply come here and underneath the options, the system settings for this page, you'll see an option for the tile view. And so we kind of allow you to be specific around what you're picking here and showing. You know, you can use the card view, you can use the tile view, you can use the grid view. That's kind of more of a grid-based line entry style entry. And you can kind of limit these too. So if you're just deploying Workamajig or you're still going through the training process, you can actually just say, you know what? For my users, when we deploy this, I don't want them to see the card or the grid view. We'll just train them on the tile view, and that's how the system will work in general. And there is, again, kind of benefits to that because this card view does not show these different classifications for your tasks and their statuses. It's more based off of the due date and the order for tasks as they're set in their projects. So again, just to recap, we'll want to turn on that assignment management page there if you want to use this workflow. You'll also want to turn on the card view here, or excuse me, the tile view here underneath the system settings. Again, you'll need the rights to the system setup or system settings options on the Today Creatives page. And then you can basically say, okay, I'm going to set this as the standard for my users and how they use the system here. Excuse me, just for a moment here. Now, so let's go ahead and pull into this here a little bit. So for these two pages and how they work here, they have a relationship with each other. So after you have this kicked on, from a project construction standpoint, this actually won't change that much. Again, you'll probably want to adjust your templates to fit this style of workflow a little bit. But essentially, when you create and assign tasks, if you're familiar with the process right now, on the card view, they're just kind of dumped in order of their due date. So the most pressing tasks will appear first. In this view or in this style of workflow, basically how this works is on the Today Creatives page or on the assignment management page, you're seeing tasks in a week-long dash. So anything that has activity in this particular week, if it has a planned start or a planned complete date in that time period, the task will basically appear on either of these two pages, and any new tasks assigned will be placed into one default column. Mine is work to be done. That's the default name for this column here. And tasks will just kind of slot in here as you add them in the order that they're added. You can still, of course, see their due dates on these cards here. You can see notes on these. I'll get into more of that. But basically, they're kind of placed into a big pool here, and they allow you to pull items out of the pool to say, okay, you know what? This particular item right here, I'm going to go ahead and click and drag it and drop this into do this today. And the design is really for this to kind of communicate back and forth between a user-based page and a more project management or administrative level page, what's happening. So I can basically, as a creative, say, okay, when I come in today here, these are the items that I've tagged as what I'm trying to do for the day. And on the opposite side here for a management style page, I can see that same thing. Or I can even kind of dictate what those items are here as a resource or as a project manager, either of the two. Now, a few questions here before we dig into both of these pages and how they work a little bit deeper. There's a question here on how this affects the staff schedule. It doesn't really change much on the staff schedule. These columns themselves are not visible there. So you can kind of see the hourly allocation. We'll talk into those. That's really more what the staff schedule would traditionally be concerned with, the number of hours over a weekly or daily period a user has assigned to them. So if you're moving tasks between these columns, it won't make much of a difference. But the only major impact that you'll see when using these screens is, of course, if you mark things as completed and they still had time resourced on them, they'll basically no longer resource that time for that period. And I have a question here from Scott regarding how to set custom statuses. I'll cover that here in just a moment when we go over this page. So yeah, just a moment here, we'll jump into that. Now, let's start with this side here, the assignment management page itself and how it works. Again, this is another workflow option. So if I go back to the main menu, this page is located underneath the resource management application and assignment management. You do need that security right, but once it's added to your security group, this will pop up right here. The assignment management page by default will ask you if you have, will ask you basically if you would like to filter down to a specific user, department, office. If you're using those different tags there, you can also filter down to a specific service. But if you just leave all these blank and search, it's basically going to return you a column here for each user in your instance, and then all of the tasks that they're assigned to. So my account manager doesn't have anything, but I'm going to go and click on mine here, and you'll see we have a few defined task statuses that we've got these open tasks in. Again, everything dumps into the work to be done column here by default. And each one of these statuses will show you the total number hours of work in this week that are assigned to those columns. So, work to be done here, 9.8, do this today, 3.3. And you'll also see underneath the card here, per day breakout of what a user is assigned to. So I don't have anything for Monday, but if I look at this 3.7 or this 3.1, hopefully you guys can kind of see that here on the screen share. If I click on either of those, it'll basically show you where those 3.7 hours are coming from. So it's kind of taking these tasks that run multiple days and say, okay, this is the number of hours per day that this user is assigned to. So this page is primarily concerned with the tasks that a user is assigned to and the statuses that they're placed in, but we do still try to provide detail on the allocated hours for a task here and how those break out. And we do still provide warnings on whether or not a user is exceeding those. So you'll notice here with Candace's on this Tuesday, she's got 10.2 hours. This will actually come up in red just to show you again that, hey, she's actually over allocated for this period here. On this particular day, we may want to kind of reassign one of these. And if I click into that 10.2, I can kind of take a peek and see It's kind of hard to see, a little bit grayed out there, but I can see, you know, the number of hours each one of these tasks is resourcing to her per week, and maybe I want to kind of move some of this around here. So, so you can do that. You can move tasks within statuses, or you can even move them between users. I could take this design task, click and drag it either in between one of these columns to say, hey, this is a priority task, for example, or I could take it and reassign it entirely by dropping it to a different user. Whichever one I drop it to, it's going to kind of reallocate the hours for those users. You can refresh and it will show you the change for that. Excuse me. Okay, so, got to re-pull these back up here again. So the basic design, though, for this page here, looks like that was a lot of work on that particular task. So the basic design for this task or this page here is, again, to show you the tasks that users have and the statuses that these are currently in. This page is a direct mirror of that Today Creatives page. So, you know, kind of what we had in mind when we were designing this page is basically you could come into here at the beginning of a weekly period, or you may even check it day to day. That's perfectly fine too. But you'll notice it always pulls a week's worth of tasks. That's not adjustable. It always is going to be a week's worth of tasks, and it's going to pull anything that has a planned start or a planned complete date that is in this week. Anything that kind of crosses over that period. And it's going to place everything in this work to be done column here. Then from there, we can basically take those tasks and start filtering them into the columns as we need. So as a resource or a project manager, I could come in and say, okay, you know what, let me take a look at my designers here, for example. If I wanted to look at that service or this particular project team, see what Daniel's up to and say, okay, you know what, let's work on this today. Let's work on this here, and let's go ahead and prioritize this piece right here. You can kind of drag those out here. And that is going to mirror exactly that on the Today Creatives page. This will live update here after a few moments. I'm just kind of refreshing to speed it up. So however I set it as an admin or as a project manager is how my user is going to see it, basically kind of defining which tasks are priority, which order I'd like you to work them in here, and placing them into the columns that match that for the workflow that we're trying to meet here. In addition to that, you can actually use this page here too, the assignment management page that is, to add some more detail to the task itself. If I highlight over some of these here, oh, there we go. There's a nice long detailed piece here about, hey, refer to the to-dos and close all these checklists here before you close the task, things like that. You'll see on the card itself, it actually mirrors the options you see on the Creatives Today page. So you can actually, on behalf of a user, set a percentage complete. You can jump into the project here using the folder icon the same way that you could with a card from the Creatives Today page. But this traffic comments or this little chat bubble option here is specific to this page and specific to this tool here, just to kind of provide some additional detail to the user. So, you know, I can put some details, going to just count in the field here just to see how this passes down. Now, when I highlight over the card itself, it'll show that in the area there. You know, there's my details at the bottom there. And again, that is something that's also passing over to my creative. If I refresh this card, I take a look at it, there's some details. So when a user kind of hovers over or looks at this information here, they'll see that pop directly onto the card. And by the way, that will also be visible on the tile view, or excuse me, the card view as well. So even if you don't necessarily use this workflow, but you think that there's a value for you to be able to use the assignment management page here, this is, I think, one of those major benefits to being able to see, to using this page, the ability to pass down specific instructions. So this is prioritized for a reason, right? Maybe we need this out by end of day, or maybe some kind of, you know, priority task came in on it, so I can go ahead and move it into that column and even add some details about, you know, what we're looking for or the urgency for it. Okay, so in addition to that, on this page here, if you click into the card itself, it will actually slide out some details on the schedule. So if you need to jump into the more granular level pieces for this, if you need to adjust durations, or if you need to adjust things like the hourly allocations for your tasks, you can do that. That's all possible from within here. Again, you do have your folder, so that allows you to kind of jump into certain areas of the project itself. But that'll probably answer a few of the questions here for you guys. Let me kind of catch up a little bit before we go further into this. Jackie's asking if an admin moving the tiles on the assignment management screen overrides any changes the user makes. It does. Actually, you can kind of have a Laurel and Hardy style sketch where you guys are moving things back and forth on each other. You could move something in here and a creative could potentially move it back. But as an admin, one of the options that you have when you're setting this up is to disable whether or not your creatives can move these tasks. So you can click disable dragging tiles option in here, and that will actually prevent your creatives from being able to move the items between columns. I get asked this question a lot when I show this tool off here too, just as a note. And I have to say that I really haven't, I've had some agencies that are a little nervous about creatives kind of going, you know what, I don't really want to work on this task here. I'm going to go and move it back. But from what I've seen so far, that really hasn't been much of the case. So I don't want to discourage you from doing that. It's definitely an option there if you need it. But I would say that, you know, so far it seems like there hasn't been a huge issue there. But either way, whichever user moved the task last by default, so if I move this from priority to in review, it will be there regardless of who moved it. That's just, you know, that's just where it is now because of the one of the two users moving it, but you can disable it for your creatives if you'd like. So Daria's asking if a resource manager rearranged tasks or reassign someone, how does the system notify the end user? Now, there is mechanisms to send out emails when you reassign a task. You can kind of set that up by default, or you can actually kind of manually trigger them if you'd like. But really, again, by default, what we're doing is when these tasks are moved, the users are going to see it. So if I take this task here and move it to Joe Schmo, it's going to show up on his dash as an item to work. By default, we're not sending out emails for these. Again, you can if you'd like to, but the system for notifying a user that they have a new task is kind of on this Today Creatives page. If you'd like supplemental emails sent out, you can, but the design is really that they'd be using this page as a reference for what they have to work on and kind of specifically which pieces are more important than others at any given time. Jessica's asking if you can add attachments into the tasks, and you can. That's actually regardless of workflow. That is something that you can do. Now, this would be kind of, I think, specific to what you would need to complete the task itself. So if I had example files or, you know, there was a Word doc or something like that that I needed associated with it, if I look at the project level, if I jump into the schedule here, this is my design task. One of the things you'll see at the project schedule level is the ability to look at a task. So in particular, I'm taking a look at the design task I have assigned to myself here. You'll see an attachments area here at the bottom of that. And any file I upload to this will be basically uploaded to the task as well. And again, that's something that the creative would see. So when I'm assigned this task here, one of the first things I do if I'm working on this priority task first is to click into the card. Any attachments would be right here underneath this files area, would just kind of show you all of the different file links and to be able to click and download those. There will be a recording sent for this. We actually post all of our recordings. I'll show you, Roselle, at the end of the call here where we store those. We have a history of all of our webinars posted to our support site. Okay, and one more here before we start kind of digging further into the options here. Jackie wants to know if the traffic comments on the tile, in addition to any information the project manager puts in those, do they override each other? They're actually separate data fields. So your task description, again, if I'm looking at the schedule here, and sorry, just to clear this up, this particular area, my some details here, that came from me on my page here, basically making a traffic comment that passes down to the card on the card or tile view and on the card itself. There's also a task description area, and a creative can actually see that when they click into the card, this description and work area here. It will print a project or a task description if you have those. Those are two independent fields. So my traffic comment appears on the card itself proper here. This task description is from that field in the project. So if I jump into that same tasks project and I look at the task details, it's in this field right here, this task description. And they do not override each other, so they can be independent pieces. Typically, this is meant to provide detail on, hey, when I say that you're working design, that means that please design, you know, 2 file types of this resolution and upload them, and, you know, just kind of a bullet of all of the different things that we're looking for there. Maybe a, hey, please check the attachments I made to this for example files, things like that. But you know, kind of more of a base of what the task itself entails. And this is actually oftentimes something you'd want to store at a template level, so you don't have to recreate it on every single project. The traffic comment is meant to be more of a day-to-day that, hey, I'm moving this this tile into priority for you because this actually does need to go out by end of day for whatever reason, just those sorts of things. So again, you can kind of use them to whatever fits best for your workflow, but they are independent fields of each other. Okay, so Kimberly also, the one more here, Kimberly's asking if moving the cards here changes the dates on the schedule for your projects. They do not. The timeline that you have on the task at the schedule level is really what, is what controls these. The only thing that can potentially change it is if you move something into the completed column, that will basically match the planned complete date to the actual complete date. So for example, if I move this priority task over to completed today, it's going to timestamp it or date stamp it with an 8/6 plan and complete and actual complete date. Okay, so let's take a few more looks here at this page here. And Michelle, I see your question regarding task description. I'll show you that in a moment when we go back to the Creatives Today page here. But I want to kind of take a look at a few of the other operations for this page. I think that the basic design of it is pretty intuitive. We have a column worth of tasks that are ready to work for this week. We move these items back and forth through these columns depending on what's needed. There is the ability to customize these here as well. So on this page, underneath the More button, if you have, again, the option to System Settings, you can adjust some of the daily operations for this, how many hours you want to be a maximum daily hours here, for example, basically highlighting whether this is red or not, right? The 9.3 exceeds the 8 warning threshold I have here, so it kind of highlights any of those in red. There is also a warning threshold level here for anything above 5 or 6 hours here. It will kind of mark it in yellow here so you can see that. There are also the ability to determine whether or not you see tasks with completed predecessors only, so whether tasks that are ready to work, essentially. And you have the ability to create a shorthand user tile page here too. So if you have a lot of users in your agency or you're kind of looking at big swaths of the agency, this is kind of a way for you, if you use the shorthand user tiles, to stack the cards a bit more vertically and use users' initials instead. So if you have quite a few different people, it can kind of just pop through each one of these and see, okay, this is what that person's working on, just kind of a more condensed version of this page here. Additionally, I mentioned that underneath these columns here, under the More button, you have the ability to edit the assignment statuses. So these different columns that pop up here, whether we name them priority or do this today, there's the defaults for this are actually work to be done, do this today, and completed. I've added a couple here in my test site to these status columns here, but you can add as many as you'd like. I don't know that there's a cap. I don't think that anyone's hit one if there is. So you can kind of insert a row for any new status that you'd like, and there's also a few other options for them. So one of these columns needs to be the default. Basically, any new task is going to be placed into that column. And you can also set a default % complete for each column for these here as well. So you can say, whenever anything's moved into the completed column here, for example, mark that task as 100% complete. Or priority here, mark that task as 5% complete. You can kind of adjust what percentage these set the tasks to. And as soon as I move something into priority, you'll notice it's 5%. If I take the same task and move it into completed, it will automatically mark it as complete. And that will mark it as complete on the schedule as well. Just the same as how you would in the card view going 100% done. Okay, so, that's the ability to edit those statuses. I also did mention that you can have these as specific for your team. So you'll notice here there's a company defaults grouping. That basically means that, hey, if you haven't defined for the security group here a difference, this is how this should work for any user using the tile view or using the assignment management page here. But you'll also notice for my security groups here, I can say, maybe I have a security group specific for my my digital team. Maybe I want them to have different assignment statuses or something like that. You'll notice these little pencils are basically saying, okay, account managers actually have a different view. I'm overriding the company default settings, and I have a different set of columns I've defined along with a different, default % complete for them. So you can have this specific to the security group for your users here too, and it will just simply change per user. So you'll actually notice this here. If I click into my account manager, they have a different column set than what the rest of my agency does. kind of allows you to have multiple different views in there. We kind of did talk through the filter options here a little bit. There's also a refresh here and here. This page does refresh every few minutes, but this is kind of a way for you to live update it if you want to see if your user, if my user had moved this from priority to completed, it wouldn't live update this page. It's kind of true as of when you opened it, so you can refresh this if you need to. And then finally, there's an assigned work column here on the left-hand side, and this allows you to see any unassigned work on your project. So basically anything that has a task or an assignment, or both really, that has a service designation saying, hey, I need a web programmer for this task here, for example. Whoops, I need to click through that. But I haven't defined who that web programmer is going to be. And it classifies these by project by default, although you have a few options for that here when you jump into the pencil icon, basically showing you that, hey, this project number and project name has these assignments currently unassigned for your user. So either, this development task, maybe this should go to, Cyril over here, and I can click and drag those tasks to assign that work to these various users here. And then I could also click over to them and say, let's go ahead and prioritize this. Please do this today. As an example. Same thing for all these, and you can filter this down here too. So there's a couple of important designations that you'll see if you click into the pencil. Number one, whether or not you have completed predecessors only, because again, we may just want to look at tasks that are ready to work. So this can oftentimes really cut down the total pool of tasks that you see in here. And this is only active projects. It won't pull completed or projects queued up by default, though you can define the statuses you'd like to see in there. You can say, I do want to see my opportunity projects along with anything that's in production currently, and go ahead and save, and it will refresh that list there. Excuse me. You can also search these tasks, so you can search for a specific service, for example. That's kind of the method right now until we add a specific service dropdown. That's something that's on the roadmap, the ability to add those. So for now, we don't have a filter for it, but if you wanted to see, design or graphic design, for example, you could kind of type that in here and it would return results for any task that meets that. So I guess account management or copywriting, or I could type in copy here and it would show me all of the tasks that are associated with that. And again, I could also filter down this page to only users that provide the copywriting service for me. Kind of allows you to make those assignments and make sure that everything's moving smoothly there. Okay, so yeah, one other kind of final note for this page here itself. You do have the ability with the plus button to be able to add a new project, task, or to-do to any of these. I do hope to spend a bit of time talking about these here towards the end, but let me take a few minutes to go through some more questions here, and then we'll jump back to the Today Creatives page side here. So, okay, so Chad was asking if you had a previously completed task and it's marked as complete, and then marked as incomplete in the Gantt view, will it reassign the task to the user in the card and tile views? So basically, if you marked it as complete, does it go away for the card view? Because that's the design right now. That's a good question, actually. Yeah, so if in the card view I mark a task as complete, it will actually drop off of that page. One of the benefits, I think, to using this sort of workflow here is if I mark a task as completed as a creative or even as an assignment, as a project or resource manager, it actually stays here for the whole week. You can look at the total number of hours or value hours, basically, of work that you've completed within that week-long range. So these tasks will stay here until the beginning of next week, where they'll basically just kind of drop off for you. But you can always go back in time and kind of look at that previous week to see what you'd completed there. Now, Chad's question basically is saying, okay, this task is now marked as complete. If I look in the schedule, that's the same way here. So long as I make this anything other than 100% complete, it will show back up on the card views as well. So now that it's 5%, it will be there in the card view for my user to be able to see and close. So yeah, it will show back up in the Gantt and it will show back up in the card view. And then we had a user ask to clarify the tasks in the left-hand column on the assignment management page under assigned work. The assigned work column for me, and really for by default here, this work to be done. Oh, this assigned work column. This is unassigned work on my project schedule. So if I look at this project here, for example, this Acme 041 job here, if I jump into the schedule of this project, these are unassigned services. So this implementation task here, I have a web content development task assigned to Joe Schmo, but I have a web programming task that no one is assigned to right now. Basically, I've said that that's something that's needed on my project schedule, but I don't know who's going to do it. So what the assigned work column does is it says, hey, that's the case. You actually have a web programming task here that's not assigned. And I can basically, from that point, take this task and figure out the right person to work on that particular task. And as soon as I drag that over here, again, that same example, if I take that implementation task and I drag it to myself here, when I look at it, this one right here. Now, when I look at the task or I look at that schedule, it will have updated that for me. Now, instead of just saying web programming, now I'm the person assigned to that. And that's a bad idea. We should probably assign someone else to the programming tasks. Okay, a couple more questions here I want to run through. Tyler's asking if the traffic comments are synced to that individual task or part of the conversations for the entire project. They're actually their own area, Tyler. So they basically, when you're looking at the traffic comments here, it's its own area here. In the project, you can actually see and adjust this here as well. So if I look at this particular one with my really brilliant some details and just the count in here, when you're looking at the assignment breakout, so if you click into the assigned column, you'll actually see that traffic comment area here too. That's really the only other area to input or see this. Now it's reportable in some of our assignment type reporting and things like that, but these two areas, either at the project level or at the assignment management screen level, are the only two areas where you can change that traffic comment. Okay, and Kavina, we won't have time to kind of walk through building a template here, but we do have some resources available, so I'll try to point those out to you here as well. And Matthew's asking kind of why some of his assigned work columns aren't showing up here. Matthew, I might have to take a look at the specific task, but the most common things are one of two things that will keep these from showing up here. Either one, the tasks are not actually set to happen in this particular week, so that this page in general, we need to have the task kind of cross over this time period at some point. It needs to have either started prior to and run through this week or have a planned complete date in this week for it to be able to pull, and that applies to the assigned work column as well. And the other major one is whether or not you have this completed predecessors only option checked. When you click the pencil right here, it slides this panel out. And this will exclude a lot of tasks on your projects by default. So it's basically saying only show me items that are ready to work. It's more than likely one of those two items. Okay, so again, want to jump a little bit more to the creative side here too. There's not really a whole lot in addition to the assignment management page. This obviously is meant to mirror that. So it gives you quite a bit of detail and gives you kind of a good idea about how this is happening. I do just like to point out a few user-specific pieces. Just as a reminder, if you have access to the system settings, you do have the ability to prevent your users from moving tasks between those columns. You can disable that. That will kind of require your users to move these pieces back and forth. And also, if you make that decision as the project manager, you will have to move these tasks. Even if a user marks something as 100% complete in these columns here, it won't automatically move that over to the completed column for you. That would be kind of a cleanup piece that you'd need to do here, where you'd take it and say, okay, now it's 100% complete. You'd basically do that on their behalf. And it would update that for you. I did mention that tasks stay in the completed column for the week-long period, but a few other notes on what shows up here and how long they stay. It's always looking at a weekly station, so that's a little bit harder to see at the creative view. I'm just showing, hey, this is my Tuesday. This is what it looks like. These are the tasks I have assigned to myself. But these things do stay here. So even if I look to the next day here, that will still show me that this was completed basically within this week-long period. And again, I could actually go back to prior weeks to see what was completed in those periods. That's kind of one of the strengths here. I can kind of kick these back out and work on them again here. But they stay within that range there. And again, this is designed to show you only active tasks on active projects. So if you have a project that's in pre-production and that's not an active status, or if you mark a project as complete, these tasks will drop off of these views here as well. It by default only pulls tasks from active projects. So in that way, it basically operates the same exact way as you would in a traditional waterfall style workflow. Tasks don't show up till your project is made active. So it doesn't really change the way you open the job. It really just changes the way that you handle your assignments and handle the resourcing or the prioritization for these tasks here. But aside from that, the cards look a teeny bit different, but they really do operate the exact same, with the exception of the the detail breakouts here. But your percentage complete folder and time entry processes, those are all largely the same, and they're meant to mirror those exact same process from the card view. So no really major retraining there. The only things that would make a huge difference, again, is to train on the columns themselves and how they operate. Okay, so there's some additional wrinkles I wanted to speak to here in regards to Kanban style workflows and specifically with digital projects. So this may not apply to things like social projects quite so much. Not sure how many people use to-dos. Oftentimes, us account managers do not train them by default because they're extra wrinkle details to your tasks. But one of the things you'll notice here when you open up your task cards is a to-do list, or at least on mine here, I have it kicked on. And this is really kind of a way to provide some extra detail on these tasks. I think one of these had a whole bunch of to-dos. Where is it? They must have reassigned it, I guess. That's a bummer. I was going to actually use one of these here. So to-dos are actually kind of a way to provide extra details and the ability to kind of mark items as complete or not. And they're especially great for things like a task. I have one here actually for one of my design-based users. I'm going to go over to his page, Joe Schmo here. I have a bug fixes task for him. This is, I think, an area where to-dos really shine, and they also show up on your cards here. So essentially what these are extra detail pieces that can be marked as completed. And they can also be kind of action items on a task. So they have really two major use cases. One is for something like this, where we say, you know what, I have a big task for bug fixes. I leave that task open for 3 months, let's say, or for even longer. To kind of note when bug fixes need to be made, and I then kind of add the details as a to-do. So I have a task here. That task may just sit and work to be done. Maybe I have a status that's on hold or something like that. But as soon as I have a few bugs, as a resource manager, I could basically add those to this task. Again, if I go back to my assignment management page here, and we'll actually look at my programmer, right? So he's got his bug fixes task here. I could click into this task. I could also go into the schedule where you can see and add to-dos here. It's kind of this middle tab underneath your task details. And I could add a to-do here saying, you know what, we've got a new bug. We've got a ticket number of whatever that bug name would be, and then I could add the description for this here. And that basically adds another action item. And it does a couple of things here for us. Number one, of course, it lets my user know that, hey, not only do I need you to work on these bug fixes here for this particular project, but when you click into the task here, here's some details about those. So that's kind of one, here's the bug, here's the details. I wasn't terribly descriptive in what was happening with these particular bugs, but you get the idea, I hope. And also, it kind of allows your user to mark these items as complete and show a log of the activity on a task like this. So if you have really long-term tasks like bug fixes or implementation or, even kind of ongoing blog posts or social media posts here, this is kind of a way for you to either, bullet item the things that need to be done for it, and then for your user to be able to mark kind of an independent piece as done within that. I could come in here and say, okay, this bug, I can actually make a comment on it even if I need to. So I can add some details about what I did and save that here. I can email that comment out to somebody here. And then at the end of the day, I can go ahead and mark my task or this to-do as completed. And that will actually drop it off of the to-do list here. It will show you there's now only one open to-do. And one of the strengths for this here is, again, if I'm looking at the task or if I'm looking at this project and I'm looking at that task in particular for bug fixes, when I look at the to-dos, we'll actually be able to see a history of what's been completed on those and a history of the detail of that. So it kind of allows you to keep tasks open for a long-term period of time and be able to track any of the activity to them. Maybe this task only pops up once every couple of weeks, but when it does, we can create a to-do item on it, slide it over to that user, and have them mark that as complete. One other use case for that here too is if I have multiple users assigned to a task here, like some of these, I've got a development task here. Here's 3 different people assigned to that. So, I have a copywriter, I have a web content developer, and I have a web programmer assigned to this particular project. One of the things that to-dos can do on this is basically say, you know what, there is a number of different action items on this project. My roles are different on this one, but it's basically saying, hey, these are the pool of tasks that need to be done or to-dos that need to be finished on this task before it's finished. And so again, it's just kind of a way for your users to be able to pick those out and say, okay, you know what, I'm going to work on this one. So you may have noticed when I was looking at the open to-dos here on the card, and I click into the details, I can assign this to myself or somebody else if needed. So the design is maybe I have 3 different people assigned to this task here. And they can kind of pick and choose what they're doing on their particular task, and they can even let each other know whether or not they're working on it, right? I can go ahead and grab it and say, okay, let me go ahead and assign this to myself. Many users won't necessarily have the ability to assign these to other people. And you do, as a project or an account manager, have a page where you can manage your to-dos in bulk as well. So to-dos are always associated with an open task. You cannot have them outside of that. So it kind of tends to be one of those 2 workflows we just discussed when you're using them there. But you do have a big page here underneath Project Manager to manage and view all open to-dos on all projects as well. Now we're kind of getting a little bit crunched here, and I want to make sure that I answer a few questions. So, so let me go ahead and jump through some of this here real quick and kind of take a look at some of the questions we have asked here. Kimberly was asking if a user moves a card to 100%, if they're able to enter time to it. That's actually a security right setting. By default, creatives don't have the rights to enter time to tasks that have been marked as complete, so they would basically have to move it out of that column first before they could do so. That's a right you can add, though, if you'd like. Yes. So Adam was asking, saying basically different work groups and project types might have different statuses they want to use. And he's asking about the statuses being global. Actually, the statuses are not global, Adam. They're set by security group. So we do allow a more customized approach for the statuses. Because again, half your team may work in a traditional waterfall style, and the other half may actually use a more Kanban or Agile style workflow. So on the assignment management page, when you're editing these statuses, just to kind of quickly reiterate, you can set the company defaults, so what most users could see, but you can also customize this by security group. So a typical use case would be to make one for your digital team or your web content design team, for example. Put them all in that security group, and then customize it to override those settings and make columns just specifically for them. Okay, and then a couple more here. Jackie was asking if you can allocate hours to each to-do on a task, and you cannot. The hourly allocation is set at the assignment and service level. So for this one here where there's open to-dos, I have a web programming task. That web programming task or assignment here basically has 10 hours allocated to it. That's not per to do. That's just basically, hey, add your time on this task and in this assignment is 10 hours. So to-dos are really just meant to be detail pieces on those tasks. Hey, your web programming for bug fixes, and then my to-do add would be the specific bug fix that's needed for it. Or you're working on implementation. Here are kind of the bullet list of items that need to be done before we consider implementation completed. Kind of really designed to keep you from being able to have to make, a large group of tasks here, because it can get pretty exhaustive or extensive here. So to-dos are just kind of a way to break out the detail on those. All right, a couple more here, and then I want to take a peek at the to-do board very quickly. Somebody else was asking if there's the ability to determine workflow or a user can drag left to right in any column. So basically, the question is, can you essentially make it to where a user can only move between the do this today and priority, for example, or priority to completed? We don't have that specific just yet. It's kind of all or nothing. So either your creatives have the ability to move these tasks between columns or they don't. Okay, so we've got 5 minutes left here. I do really quickly want to show the to-do board before we wrap up, and then give them the chance for 1 or 2 more questions here. But I want to show off this to-do board here. This is a way really for you to be able to see kind of the detail of all open to-dos in your instance. So if I just search this without being specific, it's basically going to show you all of your to-dos, which can also have their own progress columns here too. So again, if I'm looking at, let's look at Joe Schmo in particular, because he's got a couple of different to-dos that are out there here for him. Now, when he's working with these tasks here themselves, or with these to-dos here, again, he has a bug fix task that has this new bug to do on it. When he grabs this, or when he sees the details of this, so I basically move this over for him, he sees, oh, I've got a task with 3 open to-dos here. Let me go ahead and refresh this real quick. There we go. He can also status these, so he can see, oh man, a whole bunch of bugs came in on this particular task here. I can go ahead and click into it as Joe and say, okay, you know what? This one is now in progress. It's one that I'm working on. And again, that detail is going to feed to the to-do board. So it kind of actually works similar to the assignment management page. And this, again, is largely used primarily for development type pieces. It's a really nice way to be able to track the change logs for them here. This kind of works as an independent piece. Oftentimes, you wouldn't necessarily use both of these pages in conjunctions. You'd basically just say, hey, I have assignments that are left open for month-long periods of time here, and this is how I want to track their activity. So it, again, kind of adds another granular level breakout. These to-dos can be turned on your system settings here. And again, they're not necessarily a requirement for working Agile. They're just an extra wrinkle. So if this looks like too much for you, or it's just going to make your process too muddy or too gummy, then that's perfectly fine. You're probably right about that. But our developers, for example, lean heavily on this to-do board because we leave tasks open for development over long periods of time. And this is a really nice way for us to track the enhancement and bug fix log for any area of the system. Now, in the last few minutes here, I want to kind of take a few more questions. So let's take a peek here. I've got one in here from Jackie saying, if all to-dos are marked as complete by the user, will it move the schedule forward? It will not. The to-dos are kind of just detail on those tasks. So a user would still need to mark it as complete. And in a lot of these workflows, again, that bug fixes task might stay open for 4 or 5 different months. And so it would really kind of be in those instances a lot of times on the project or the account manager to mark those tasks as complete. We're ending a contract with this particular user, or we're opening up the Q4 project, or a 2020 project for this particular one here. So in workflows that lean heavily on to-dos, oftentimes the users are just marking the to-dos as complete or statusing them, and it's actually a project or an account manager who's statusing the task itself. The kind of an additional question on that is if there's a way to set things so that a project manager gets a notification, or if the task changes to color when all of the to-dos are marked as complete by the user or the team member. That's a really good question too, because we actually have some pieces here on the Today Creatives page, because this is oftentimes how user would access this. You can use either this tile view or even the card view for it, but there is an option here in system settings that will actually only populate tasks when they have open to-do items only. So for example, that bug fixes task I have can kind of just lurk in the wings, kind of hidden, until I actually add a to-do to it. And then it will appear for the user. So it's kind of a way to only show tasks that have to-do items. Again, the workflow is kind of a commitment to that style of management. So so we can kind of just make or hide them and only show those tasks when there are actually open to-do items on them. And then a question here regarding the statuses determined in the to-do board, kind of where they come from is what I'm assuming you're asking here. So let me come back to that to-do board here. These are the ones that we create for you by default. We actually have, to-dos don't actually necessarily have statuses unless you kick them on. You'll see in your system setting, this is actually something under your transaction preferences. Sorry, I'm going a little bit deep tracks here, but I'm kind of pressed for time. So when you turn on to-dos, there's basically a use of to-do items here, and you can determine whether you want to use statuses with those, and you can even use types for reporting purposes. So you don't necessarily have to use the columns that I was showing there on the to-do board, but that is something that you can add to them if you see a need for that or you see value in it. And then you can determine them just like you can on the assignment management page. You can on the to-do board change what those statuses are or those column sets. You can kind of define what these say and how they operate. And you can have a whole bunch of them and kind of collapse or add new to-dos from this page here as well. Okay, one or two more here real quick. The bug number, when I created those, I actually made that bug number manually. So I basically just kind of entered it in. We don't really have a mechanism to enter those manually. Although to-dos, I believe they can be numbered here. Yeah, each one of these to-dos, you'll notice this one's 126. They're sequentially numbered. So I guess you'd probably have to only use them for bugs, but we don't automatically number those. Okay, so squeezed a lot into a limited time frame here. Just to kind of wrap this up again, I tried to stay relatively top level. So if you have specific workflow questions or you kind of want to do a more guided training specific to your particular processes here, you may or may not use to-dos, for example. You may define some extra statuses and whatnot. That's all fine. But I would definitely encourage you to reach out to your account manager if you have any questions. You can always reach us here at support@workamajig.com. You could also kind of schedule a follow-up training for that. So, if you're interested in delving into this a little bit deeper, don't hesitate to reach out to us and ask any questions. And the recording for this will actually be up on our support site. I want to point this out here real quick. If you type in support.workamajig.com, that is our support site. It has a number of our different articles and guided walkthroughs here. But there is in here, I believe I just searched webinar. Yeah, there is a past and upcoming webinars area here. So in the past webinars, this will actually show you everything that we've done here. We've done quite a few of these here. Some of them we've done a couple of different times. And so you can actually come through and download the recordings for any past webinar that we've had here if you want to see what went on in those. And we also keep tabs on what your upcoming webinars are here as well. So just search webinar in here. The top two results will kind of get you what you need here. And for the rest of this month, we're covering CSIV card, project request workflows, and purchasing and expenses. So some exciting stuff there. But again, I want to say thank you to everyone for joining us here today. If you have any questions or you need any more information, don't hesitate to reach out to us at support@workamajig.com. And I hope you all have a great day.